He set it at the fence line just before sundown, with the Montana wind moving through the dry grass, and the young schoolteacher standing close enough to hear the truth he had been trying not to say for weeks. "You're too young for a broken old rancher." He expected her to agree, or pity him, or walk away before he made a fool of himself. Instead, she stepped closer, looked at him like he was a lesson everyone else had failed to understand, and whispered, "To me, you're perfect." That was the moment Elias Ward realized he had not grown too old for love. He had only grown too used to refusing it. Before I tell you why she chose him over every suitable man in town, tell me where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Montana Territory, 1889. Elias Ward was 57 years old, and he had stopped expecting anything from his life roughly 10 years before this story begins, which was the same year his wife Martha had died after a long illness that took her slowly enough for him to watch every part of it happen. He was not a bitter man. Bitterness requires a kind of ongoing argument with the world, and Elias had simply stopped arguing. He had a ranch of 300 acres that ran clean and well, fences mended on schedule, cattle fat and healthy, a barn that never leaked. He was, by any outside measure, a man who had things in order. Inside the house, the order was a different kind. One cup on the table each morning. One chair pulled up to the fire each evening. A dog named Scout who slept by the stove and had, over the years, become the only creature Elias spoke to in full sentences. He had decided, without ever announcing it to himself in so many words, that he was finished with the part of life where a person hopes for things. He called this being content. It was not quite that. It was simply the absence of expecting anything different. Nora Bellamy arrived in the town of Larkin that same autumn, 27 years younger than Elias, and carrying with her a trunk of books, a teaching certificate, and a particular kind of resolve that doesn't announce itself loudly but holds firm under pressure, the way good rope does. She was 30 years old, intelligent in the way that shows itself through listening rather than talking, and she had come to Montana for reasons the town did not fully know yet, though they would. She had been engaged once, back east, to a man named Theodore Vance, the kind of match everyone in her former life had called sensible. Good family, good prospects, a future that looked correct from every angle anyone bothered to examine it from. 3 weeks before the wedding, Nora had broken the engagement, not because Theodore had done anything cruel, but because she had woken up one morning and understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that she was about to spend the rest of her life performing a version of happiness that other people had approved of on her behalf. She came to Montana to teach school, yes, but underneath that, she came looking for a life that felt like hers rather than one that simply looked right from the outside. The children of Larkin took to her immediately. She did not just teach them letters and numbers, she noticed them, the quiet ones who needed drawing out, the loud ones who needed somewhere to put their energy, the ones whose home lives showed up in small ways nobody else bothered to see. Within a month, half the town had an opinion about the new school teacher, and nearly all of those opinions were favorable, which in a small town is its own kind of attention. Her first meeting with Elias Ward was small and entirely practical, the way these things often are before they become anything else. The schoolhouse stove had begun smoking badly into the room, and Nora, having asked around about who in the area was reliable with such things, was told plainly to ride out to the Ward place, since Elias Ward could fix anything with a flue and a draft and wouldn't charge a penny for the trouble. She found him repairing a section of fence, and he straightened up when she introduced herself and explained the problem in the same brief, clear way she explained most things. "Flues likely choked with soot from last winter," Elias said, "or the dampers rusted half shut. I'll come look at it Thursday." He paused. No charge. Children shouldn't sit in a smoking room to learn their letters. It was not a long conversation. It could not have lasted more than 2 minutes, But Nora found herself thinking about it on the ride back, the plainness of it, the way he had answered her question fully without wasting a single unnecessary word. And Elias, for his part, found himself thinking about her voice for longer than the length of their exchange should have justified, and was mildly annoyed with himself for it. He came Thursday, fixed the flu in 20 minutes, refused coffee, and left. The second visit was Nora's doing. 2 weeks later, when one of her students, a boy named Tommy Hale, stopped coming to school for 3 days running. She rode out to ask Elias, who employed the boy's father seasonally, whether he knew what had happened. It turned out Tommy had been helping his father through a difficult stretch of branding season and simply hadn't had the time, a fact Elias resolved within the hour by speaking quietly to the boy's father about priorities in a way that somehow left no hard feelings and got Tommy back in his seat by Monday. After that, the visits kept happening, each with its own small, sensible reason. A question about whether the creek crossing on the school road was safe for the younger children. A discussion about whether Elias might let Tommy and 2 other boys practice riding in his near pasture, since he had the gentlest horses in the county. A borrowed map of the territory that Nora needed for a geography lesson, which Elias happened to have rolled in a drawer from his own schooling decades before. Each visit, Nora noticed something new about him. She noticed that he never raised his voice with the boys learning to ride, even when they did something foolish, his corrections coming low and steady, more patient than most men managed with their own grown sons. She noticed that Scout, the dog who by Elias's own admission trusted almost no one, had accepted Nora within her second visit, leaning his whole weight against her leg the moment she dismounted, as if some private canine judgment had already been settled. She noticed that without ever once mentioning it, Elias had begun setting out 2 cups when he made coffee on the mornings he expected her, though he never commented on the second cup, and neither did she, and somehow the not mentioning of it became its own kind of intimacy. She noticed, too, that his silences were not empty. They were the silences of a man who said exactly what he meant and nothing more, which after a lifetime around people who said a great deal while meaning very little, struck Nora as something closer to honesty than most conversations she'd known. One afternoon, walking the eastern fence line together, after she'd come to return the territory map, Nora found a small wooden shelf in the barn, clearly new, clearly built with care, sized in a way that seemed unusually specific. "What's this for?" she asked. Elias did not quite meet her eyes. "Thought you might want somewhere to set your school things when you visit, rather than balancing them on a fence post." He had measured it, she realized, against the books she usually carried. He had not said a word about it until she found it herself. The town noticed the visits long before either Elias or Nora had said anything to each other worth noticing. Larkin was the kind of place where a schoolteacher riding out to a widower's ranch more than twice drew attention. Not necessarily cruel attention, but attention all the same, the watchful kind small towns specialize in. And among those paying closest attention was Calvin Price. Calvin was 31, the only son of the man who owned the Larkin Bank, handsome in the unbothered way of someone who had never needed to work hard for anyone's good opinion, and from the moment Nora arrived in town, he had decided, with the easy confidence of a man used to getting what he set his mind to, that she was meant to be his. He sent flowers to the schoolhouse. He offered a donation toward new readers for the classroom, made a point of being seen offering it. He arranged to be present at the church social, at the harvest dance, at every gathering where he might stand beside her long enough for the town to begin drawing its own conclusions. Calvin was not, in his own mind, a villain. He believed, sincerely, that he was the better match, the sensible one, and in many ways the town agreed with him. He was her age, nearly. He had standing, money, a future that looked correct from every angle, which was precisely the kind of future Nora had already once walked away from in another life, a fact Calvin did not know and would not have understood if he had. When word reached him that Nora had been riding out to the Ward Ranch with some regularity, his manner toward her shifted, subtly but unmistakably, from courtship into something closer to correction. "People are talking," he told her one afternoon outside the general store, his voice pleasant, almost concerned. "A young teacher, unmarried, riding alone, out to a widower's place. My father sits on the school board, Nora. I'd hate for anyone to question your judgment over something so easily avoided." "My judgment," Nora repeated. "I only mean," Calvin said, "that a position like yours depends on the town's confidence. Reputation matters more for a woman in your line of work than it perhaps should, but it does. I'm only thinking of what's best for you." It was the particular cruelty of a kindness that wasn't quite kindness, dressed carefully enough that refusing it felt unreasonable. Nora understood exactly what it was. She had heard its cousin once before, in a parlor back east, from a man who had also only been thinking of what was best for her. "I appreciate your concern," she said evenly. "I'll continue making my own decisions about where I ride and why." Word of Calvin's growing displeasure traveled, as word does in small towns, until it reached Elias second-hand through Tommy's father, who mentioned it carefully, the way a man mentions something he suspects his listener won't want to hear, that the bank owner's son had been making certain comments, that there had been talk, mild but persistent, of the school board perhaps having a quiet word with the new teacher about appearances. Elias absorbed this the way he absorbed most difficult things, quietly, alone, turning it over while he walked his fence lines with Scout trotting at his heel and saying nothing useful back to him, no matter how many one-sided conversations Elias started that week. He came to a decision the way he came to most decisions, slowly but completely. He decided that the kindest thing, the only fair thing, was to put a stop to something before it cost Nora Bellamy anything she couldn't get back. The next time she rode out, he met her at the eastern fence, the same stretch where the new shelf had quietly appeared weeks before, and he did not invite her in for coffee. "I think you should stop coming out here," Elias said. Nora went very still. "Why?" "Because you're 30 years old with your whole future still ahead of you, and I'm 57 with most of mine behind me," Elias said. He was not performing humility. He believed every word of it, plainly, the way he believed in mended fences and honest debts. "Because Calvin Price can offer you a life without talk, without the town watching you, without anyone questioning your judgment for riding out to see a worn-down rancher who buried one wife already and hasn't much left in him to offer a second time." He looked out at the land, the long gold light running across the dry grass toward the mountains. "You're too young for a broken old rancher," he said, "and I'd rather lose these visits now than watch you lose something that matters more than a few afternoons of company." He expected her to nod, perhaps with relief, the way a person nods when they've been given permission to do the sensible thing they'd already half decided on their own. He braced for it the way he braced for most disappointments now, automatically, without much feeling left over for the impact. Nora did not nod. She stepped closer instead, close enough that he had to actually look at her rather than at the mountains, and when she spoke, her voice held none of the gentle pity he'd prepared himself for. "I know exactly how old you are," she said. "I know what the town will say, because they've already started saying it. I left a fine, sensible engagement 3 weeks before my wedding because everyone around me agreed it was the correct choice, and not one of them asked whether it was the right one. I know precisely what an approved life feels like from the inside, Elias. It's quiet, in a way that isn't peace. It's correct in a way that isn't true." She held his eyes. "I am not confused about what I'm choosing." She let that settle before she continued. "You think I come out here despite who you are. I come out here because of who you are. Because you say true things without dressing them up. Because you've never once told me what I should feel or think, the way nearly every other man in that town seems eager to. Because you set out 2 cups and never made me thank you for it. Because Scout trusted me before you'd decided whether you would, and dogs, in my experience, are rarely wrong about people." She paused. "I didn't fall in love with your age, Elias. I'm not sure I've ever once thought about it as anything more than a number. I fell in love with the man who built a shelf the exact size of my books and never said a word about it until I found it myself." Elias said nothing. The wind moved through the dry grass between them. "To me," Nora said, quiet and certain, "you're perfect." He did not understand, in that moment, that she meant something specific by it. Not flawless, not without fault or weight or grief, but exactly, precisely the thing she had been looking for without knowing its shape, until she found it standing at a fence line in worn boots, building shelves nobody asked him to build. Elias Ward did not propose to her that evening. This is important, because a lesser version of this story would have had him sweep her into an immediate declaration, and that was not who Elias was. He was a man who turned things over carefully before he trusted them, the same way he turned over a piece of land before deciding whether it would hold a fence post. He went home that night and sat by the stove, with Scout's head resting heavy on his boot, and he did, for the first time in 10 years, something resembling an honest conversation with himself, conducted partly out loud, to the only listener who'd had any patience for him in a decade. "She said I was perfect," Elias told the dog, who thumped his tail once in what might have been agreement or might simply have been the stove popping. "I've spent 10 years thinking the years behind me were an argument against the years ahead of me." He sat with that for a long moment. Might be I was wrong about that. He did not sleep well that night, not from distress, but from the particular restlessness of a man whose mind has started moving again after a long stillness. The following days, the town's pressure did not ease. Calvin, hearing through some channel or another that Nora had been seen at the Ward Ranch yet again, made his concern more pointed, speaking to 2 members of the school board directly about the propriety of the matter, framing it always as worry rather than control, which made it harder for anyone to object to outright. The board had not yet acted, but the suggestion now hung over Nora's position in a way it hadn't before, a quiet pressure with real teeth behind its polite phrasing. Nora, for her part, refused to let the matter shrink her. When 2 board members raised it carefully after a Sunday service, she answered them plainly. "I left one life because everyone else called it right," she said. "I won't build another one the same way." It was not defiance for its own sake. It was simply the truth, stated the way she stated most things, without apology and without unnecessary heat. It was a Saturday, 3 weeks after the fence line conversation, when Larkin noticed something had changed in Elias Ward. He did not go to the feed store, which was his usual Thursday errand moved forward, and he did not wait for Sunday service. He rode directly into town on a Saturday morning, hitched his horse outside the schoolhouse instead of the church or the general store, and walked toward the door with his hat in his hand, which several townspeople watched with open curiosity, since in 10 years no one had ever seen Elias Ward break a single one of his routines. Nora was inside, checking the previous week's lessons against the ledger she kept for the school board, when she heard the door. She looked up, expecting one of the children, and found Elias standing in the doorway instead, hat in hand, looking like a man who had decided to stop arguing with himself and simply hadn't quite worked out yet how to begin the next sentence. "I came to say something," he said, "and I'd rather say it plainly than dress it up, because I never learned how to dress things up, and I expect you wouldn't want me to start now." Nora set down her pen. "I spent 10 years thinking the years behind me were an argument against the years ahead of me," Elias said. "Thought I'd had my chance at this, used it up, and the decent thing was to step aside and let it go to someone with more years left to spend on it. I was wrong about that. I think I've been wrong about it for some time, and you were the one who finally made it impossible for me to keep believing it." He turned his hat once in his hands, the only outward sign of how much the next part cost him. "If you're willing to take the ranch, the winters, the quiet, the dog, and a man who thinks too slowly, but means what he says when he finally says it. Elias said, "I'd be honored if you became my wife." Nora rose from behind the desk. She did not make him wait the way some women might, out of habit or instinct toward drama. She had never been someone who confused hesitation with depth. "It was always going to be yes," she said. "I was just waiting for you to stop arguing with yourself." The wedding took place in late autumn. Small and plain, exactly the kind of ceremony Elias would have chosen, and Nora found she preferred to anything grander. Calvin Price attended, to his credit, having quietly withdrawn his objections once it became clear that the town's opinion on the matter had shifted, slowly but firmly, in Nora's favor. The school board, faced with a teacher who had never once given them genuine cause for concern and a community that had grown to respect her plain refusal to be managed, let the matter rest entirely. What the town came to understand, gradually and without anyone needing to announce it outright, was that the sensible choice and the right one are not always the same thing, and that a woman capable of telling the difference, capable of holding to it even under pressure, dressed up as concern, was not someone whose judgment needed protecting after all. Nora moved her trunk of books out to the ranch that winter. Elias built her a proper shelf for them in the front room, taking careful measurements first, the same quiet habit that had started this whole story without either of them noticing at the time. The house that had held one cup and one chair for 10 years now held 2 of everything, and the silence that had once simply been absence became something else entirely, the comfortable kind 2 people share when neither feels the need to fill every moment with talk. Years later, when their son was old enough to ask for it, Nora found herself watching Elias teach the boy to sit a horse with the same low, patient corrections he'd once used on Tommy Hale and the other boys from the schoolhouse, never raising his voice, never rushing the lesson past where the boy could follow it. "Can you teach him to ride, and keep his word, and read the weather before it turns?" she asked one evening, watching the 2 of them from the porch. "Yes," Elias said simply. "Then you're exactly what he needs," Nora said, and meant every part of it, the way she meant most things, without dressing it up. Elias Ward's mistake had never been his age. It had been mistaking his age for his worth, treating the years behind him as a debt against the years still owed to him, when Nora had never once been counting that way at all. She hadn't fallen in love with his history or his arithmetic. She had fallen in love with his patience, his honesty, his quiet decency, the 2 cups of coffee he never mentioned, and the shelf he never explained. Sometimes the heart doesn't look at a calendar. It looks at a person, plainly, the way Elias looked at a fence line, or a flue, or a frightened young horse, and it simply knows what it knows. And sometimes, when someone tells you that you're perfect, they were never talking about being flawless at all. They were telling you that you are, finally and exactly, the thing they had been looking for. Have you ever counted yourself out before someone else saw your worth? Thank you for riding with me today. Wherever you are, I'm grateful you were here. Until next time, keep riding.